Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. The 2025 One Chicago crossover tragedy is a blessing in disguise for one Med character. The 2025 One Chicago crossover felt like a breath of fresh air after years without a franchise-wide team-up, but the 3-hour event offered a sigh of relief for one member of the Chicago Med team as well. Like other One Chicago crossover events, the plot was rife with tragedy and disaster. Entitled In the Trenches, the 2025 One Chicago crossover story focuses on a gas explosion at the Employee Benefits Department, which causes numerous casualties both above and below ground. As Firehouse 51 tries to mitigate damage and CPD looks for the perpetrators, Gaffney works to save who they can. With numerous victims requiring emergency field treatment, while others are hastily rushed to the hospital, Chicago Med's cast find themselves particularly spread out. Even those trapped underground require urgent care, which has to be provided by Kid and Ruzek via instructions given over the phone, and at one point through Morse code. But the two most important patients in the crossover are both treated at Gaffney, one a perpetrator of the attack and the other a fellow first responder. It's in treating the latter that one character's able to work through lingering grief from recent events on Chicago Med. Season 10, Episode 10 of Chicago Med begins with Ripley learning that Sully's almost fully healed and ready for release back to prison. At no point does the episode even hint that Sully's at risk of dying, making his death that much more of a shock. It goes without saying that Ripley would grieve the loss of his best friend, but the real torture is that Ripley had just bought Sully more time away from prison before receiving the news. It's a devastating twist, but story turns like this are how Chicago Med became the top-rated One Chicago series. Since the 2025 One Chicago crossover happened only 1 week after Sully's death on Chicago Med, Ripley's pain is still fresh. To make matters worse, Asher and Ripley get called straight from Sully's funeral to help with the emergency. Hannah says Mitch was grateful for an excuse to leave, but that only emphasizes just how deeply he's feeling the gravity of Sully's loss. Since Asher also reveals that Ripley gave Sully's eulogy, it's safe to say that his eagerness to leave wasn't because he finds funeral services boring. Luckily, the attack gives him an excuse to redirect his focus. Since Chicago Fire's role in the 2025 Chicago One crossover was significantly larger than Chicago Med's, Gaffney Medical, and by extension Ripley, doesn't get a whole lot of screen time. Nonetheless, Trudy's medical treatment after getting shot in the back plays an extremely important role in the story. If Lennox and Ripley fail to save Trudy, they're not only letting down the CPD but also Mouch and everyone at 51 who cares about him. This makes it absolutely vital for Ripley not to lose concentration by getting wrapped up in his own grief. Aside from giving Ripley an emotional reprieve, distracting Ripley with Trudy's care ultimately benefits future Chicago Med episodes. Sully's death will likely affect Ripley for multiple episodes, and it wouldn't be fulfilling to watch him begin that journey amid the chaos of a 3-way crossover with numerous plot threads. That story belongs in a separate Chicago Med episode, when Ripley and Hannah have time to discuss it. Weekly Med viewers can already feel Ripley's sorrow lingering in the background, and that's enough for the crossover's purposes. In fact, keeping Ripley's focus on Trudy might even help with his emotional recovery. One of the harshest moments in Sully's death reveal is Lynn beating herself up for not being there when he passed. Similarly, Mouch spends most of the crossover torn between staying with Trudy or helping his team. This complements the general feel of 2025's One Chicago crossover as a whole. The first act is rife with spectacle, but the true emotional drive of the story comes from watching characters fear for their loved ones with little ability to help them. Since Mouch is the only character to actually see his partner in critical condition, his concerns feel more tangibly urgent. When Mouch fearfully confronts Ripley for using an experimental treatment on Trudy, his demeanor likely strikes a familiar note. Seeing Lynn's distress reflected on Mouch's face should make saving Trudy feel even more rewarding. Ripley may not spend much of the 2025 One Chicago crossover processing his grief in the traditional way, but he at least gets to save someone from reliving the pain he watched Lynn go through. Now that the dust has settled and Mitch has time to be alone with his thoughts, he'll hopefully be able to find meaning in that experience. The 2025 One Chicago crossover event was billed as the most ambitious in franchise history. A multi-agency operation spiraling out of control, a high-rise explosion in the South Loop, and a shadowy cover-up that stretched from City Hall to the ER. But while the tragedy left Chicago devastated and fans reeling, it also set the stage for an unexpected transformation, especially for one Chicago Med character whose arc had long simmered in the background, Dr. Hannah Asher. The night began with chaos. A gas leak in a luxury condo tower triggered a fire that rapidly spread across multiple floors. Station 51 raced to the scene. Intelligence scrambled to figure out who had tampered with the building's infrastructure. Med was inundated within minutes. Burn victims, blast injuries, chemical exposure. And amid it all, Dr. Asher found herself front and center. Not as the haunted addict turned OB-GYN, but as a leader no one expected. Hannah had clawed her way back from addiction. She'd been given chances, lost trust, and fought tooth and nail to earn it back. But in the shadow of heavy hitters like Dr. Halstead or Dr. Charles, she often faded into the background. Competent but quiet, caring but cautious, the crossover changed that. In the critical hours following the explosion, with Dr. Archer sidelined due to a partial building collapse and Halstead pulled into an FBI debrief, it was Hannah who stepped up. Initially, she didn't mean to. She was supposed to be covering OB. But when the ET flooded with victims, 2 pregnant women among them, and the trauma bay turned into a war zone, something shifted in her. She grabbed the reins. The moment that truly defined her came when a young firefighter, trapped in the building for hours, was rushed in. He was hypothermic, unconscious, and had signs of internal bleeding. No surgeons were available. Crockett was in an OR already overwhelmed. Hannah made the call, page everyone, stabilize with what they had, and lead the team herself. Dr. Marcel, later reviewing the footage, would admit with a quiet shake of his head, she saved that kid's life. But the blessing didn't lie solely in the spotlight. The tragedy forced Hannah to confront something deeper than professional growth. One of the victims brought in during the chaos was her former sponsor from Narcotics Anonymous, an unexpected blast from a life she thought she left behind. He was in critical condition, his wife tearful, clutching Hannah's hand and whispering, "He always said you were his miracle." It cracked something in her. Not in a way that broke her, but in a way that rebuilt her stronger. The collision of past and present gave her clarity. For years, Hannah's storyline had circled around recovery, relapse, redemption. But the writers of One Chicago finally pushed her beyond that. In the aftermath of the explosion, when press conferences were held and city officials demanded answers, Med quietly celebrated Hannah's poise under pressure. Archer, recovering in his hospital bed, looked at her and said with unexpected humility, "You've got this, Asher. I don't say that lightly." By the next week, Goodwin called her into the office, not to reprimand her as she once had, but to offer her a new role. Interim chief of the ED while Archer remained on medical leave. The blessing had taken form. Fans on social media exploded in support. #ArrowHannah trended for days. For the first time, Dr. Hannah Asher wasn't just a character tied to a cautionary tale of addiction, she was a force. A leader. And someone worthy of the same narrative weight as the others. But what made her arc resonate wasn't just her medical heroism. It was the quiet scene days after the chaos. Sitting alone in the hospital chapel, Hannah lit a small candle, not just for the patients lost or the first responders injured, but for herself. The version of her that might have never survived to see this day. Her sponsor's wife joined her, and the 2 women sat in silence, healing, processing, growing.